That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, we're going to go through and talk about every single wide receiver matchup this week. I'll throw in some tight ends as well, just because I know there are a lot of players that there are certain questions around. But of course, before we dive into anything, you know we have to give away some free Fantasy Flock Network hats. And our winners for this video are going to be Hunter and Alex. Thank y'all so much for supporting the channel. Every time you go down there, drop a like on a video, leave a comment, you get entered in to win a free Fantasy Flock Network hat. And I need to give y'all a massive thank you. Yesterday, we passed 64,000 subscribers on the channel. So thank you for always going down there, dropping those likes and leaving those comments and helping us continue to grow the flock. And before we get into it, you know what we're going to have to do? We're going to have to clarify that you're going to see player props on the screen throughout this video. You're going to see them next to the players as we discuss them, over, under, receiving yards, yada, yada, yada. If you want to be able to go and bet any of those lines, it's available in pretty much every single state, not Nevada, not Hawaii, not Wyoming, not Washington State. Outside of that, you should be good. Those are going to be found on Underdog Fantasy. On Underdog Fantasy, not only can you bet on those player props, but you can also get into fantasy drafts. And when you use promo code FLOCK, you actually get your first deposit matched dollar for dollar up to $100. So I think that should be it. Let's go through and let's dive into these matchups. And let's start it off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons. And with Tampa, yes, Godwin, yes, Mike Evans, both really disappointed this past week. And I have no idea why, to be completely honest. I mean, yes, you have Rob Gronkowski coming out and dominating, but still so far this season, Chris Godwin's the wide receiver 13 on a points per game basis. Mike Evans is right up there as well. I mean, averaging 16.4 fantasy points per game. Godwin's at 16.8. You start both wide receivers, especially in a nice matchup here against the Atlanta Falcons. One thing that we can discuss, and I got this question earlier in a live stream, I want to say Monday night, is can you start Mike Evans and Rob Gronkowski on the same team? I mean, is it going to be a scenario where Evans is productive this week, Gronk is productive the next, and really they just eat into each other? Well, of course, you're going to be starting them regardless, because maybe if you want to say that Mike Evans is a little bit more volatile with the presence of Rob Gronkowski, that may be a fair assessment. But the thing is, if you're going to have to try to pick the wide receiver slash tight end that's going to be popping off on a week-to-week basis, it's going to be so damn hard. You know that there are going to be a lot of points in this situation. You just go through and you take the good with the bad. You play them, even if you have a week like this past week for Mike Evans, where he only comes away with 4.5 fantasy points against the Colts. But I mean, still, even going back and looking at Mike Evans and Gronk when they played together so far this season, you can go and you can go back to the last time they played the Atlanta Falcons, and Rob Gronkowski, a great day from a fantasy standpoint. He was the top tight end in fantasy with multiple receiving touchdowns that week. And what happened with Mike Evans in that week that Gronk had multiple receiving touchdowns? Oh, yeah. Mike Evans still dropped 24 fantasy points, still had 9 targets, 5 receptions, 57 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns in his own right. So don't overthink it. You play Godwin, you play Evans, and you play Rob Gronkowski. With Gronk, we had to just jack him up in our rest of season rankings this past week. Because not only are you looking at the fact that he has just been dominant with the production so far this season, but at the same time, it's not like the touchdown rate is through the roof. I mean, going back after the first 2 weeks this season where he has 4 total touchdowns through 2 weeks, there we were looking at Gronk saying maybe it's a place to sell him high, maybe pivot over to Darren Waller if we can, because there's no way he keeps up this touchdown rate. Since then, it's actually been really sustainable. If you're looking at Rob Gronkowski, this is a player that's had 40 targets and 4 touchdowns. That's a fair mark. He's scoring touchdowns at a lower rate than what you have with someone like Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox is going to come back to the mean way before Rob Gronkowski will, with the role that he has in Tampa and the talent that he is and the talent that Tom Brady is. And the volume here is very safe at the same time. I mean, if we go through, if you remove that 1 week against the New Orleans Saints where he only had 1 target, clearly he wasn't healthy. I mean, that was a game that he shouldn't have played. And if instead we just look at weeks 1, 2, 3, and 11 and 12, that 5-week span, 8, 5, 8, 8, 9 targets. And knowing that those targets are going to be significantly more efficient than pretty much any other tight end in the NFL, given the talent that he is, given how opponents really have to go through and key in on both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, Gronk is an elite level tight end down the stretch. Play Gronk as well. I don't need to tell you that, though. What we do need to talk about with the Atlanta Falcons is who are we starting? You can't start any wide receiver. It really comes down to, are we playing Kyle Pitts? And Kyle Pitts, it's so difficult for me to talk on him because this is a player I didn't like coming into the season based on where he was going, based on historical hit rates for rookie tight ends. But now we've been going through and saying Kyle Pitts, stud level tight end, stud level tight end, stud level tight end over the past month. I mean, we've been betting on the bounce back with Kyle Pitts, and it simply hasn't been there. Now, the reason we're betting on the bounce back is because with no Calvin Ridley, this offense really has nobody else to go to. And if you're looking at what we have had from Kyle Pitts this season, 75 targets for a 6'6", 240-pound, a monstrous wingspan, Calvin Johnson level wingspan, tight end that is the most athletic tight end in the NFL. You're going, okay, 75 targets, 750 receiving yards, probably 8-9 receiving touchdowns. No, the efficiency has been horrendous. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. A, he's a rookie tight end. B, Matt Ryan has been literal buns. But now, I think that you still look at Kyle Pitts based on this volume that he has had, based on the talent that we believe he possesses. I think you still probably have to go through and just play Kyle Pitts. I mean, I hate to say it because we've been saying it every single day over the past month, and every single day over the past month, he's been disappointing. But if you continue to see this level of involvement in your passing game, we have to get the ball up sometimes. Play Kyle Pitts. He's going to be a mid to low end tight end one, but he's going to be someone that needs to be started in your lineup. Now, our next game, the Arizona Cardinals, the Chicago Bears. Can't really speak on the Cardinals too much here because we don't really have the scenario of Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins officially. I am personally operating under the assumption that both Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins play this week. And in that case, I think the only wide receiver we're going to be playing in this offense will be DeAndre Hopkins. Now, if DeAndre Hopkins were to miss and Kyler Murray were to play, then we pivot over and instead you can play both Christian Kirk and AJ Green as volatile wide receiver threes with upside. And then outside of that, play Zach Ertz. Don't need me to tell you it. Now, going over to Chicago, Darnell Mooney is going to be making our top 24 wide receivers this week. I will say, I am still pretty hesitant, to be completely honest. Now, I know a lot of people want to look at Darnell Mooney and get very excited. I understand why. I mean, with Darnell Mooney, this is a wide receiver that came from the waiver wire last season. And whenever you have someone coming off the waiver wire for the rest of their career, they will always be deemed, the favorite of fantasy football drafters everywhere. I get why people love Darnell Mooney. But still at the same time, if you're looking at the implied team total this week, and I always am the first one to say that Vegas knows more than myself. Vegas knows more than you. When you're watching this video, Vegas knows more than anybody making YouTube videos, anybody making podcasts, anybody on ESPN. They're not going to be able to beat Las Vegas in the long term. I can promise you that. And Chicago's projected to score 18.5 points. They have been projected to be the third lowest scoring offense this week, only behind the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. And with how this offense is going to be capped overall, I would be a little hesitant to go through and start Darnell Mooney if Allen Robinson were to play. But assuming that you have no Allen Robinson in Chicago, I think you have to start Mooney even in the tough matchup. Now, our next game, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, with T. Higgins, we're going to continue to say must start wide receiver, top 24 guy every single week. You play T. Higgins, tough matchup against the Chargers, doesn't matter. When he can get to 8 targets a game in that offense, T. Higgins is a wide receiver that needs to be in your starting lineup. Now, Jamar Chase, very similar scenario with Jamar Chase. Y'all know we were screaming to sell him high when he was dropping 200 receiving yards in a game. I don't want to be deemed this Jamar Chase fanboy, but yes, Jamar Chase has been disappointing over the past month. I want to just chalk it up for the volatility of a rookie wide receiver that you would come to expect throughout his rookie season, which is why you should be selling him when he's at his peak with 200 receiving yards in a game. But why now he's at his bottom. If anything, I think Jamar Chase is a very intriguing buy low candidate. If we take a step back, he's still the wide receiver 12 on a points per game basis so far this season. So you've still had that top end level production from Jamar Chase. I know over the past month, against the Jets, 32 receiving yards. Against the Browns, 49 receiving yards. Against the Raiders, 32 receiving yards. Against the Steelers, 39. He has not had 50 receiving yards in a single game over the past month. I'd be very interested to know what they have as player prop on for Underdog Fantasy at the moment. But nonetheless, I think you have to start him. It's not a good matchup against the Chargers either. You're assuming that you're going to have, this being a Joe Mixon game where they're just going through and running the ball over and over again with Joe Mixon. For that reason, don't consider Tyler Boyd. The only way you can consider Tyler Boyd is with an injury to Higgins or Jamar Chase, or they're in a full-blown shootout. That's not going to be one of these games. You have to start both Chase and Higgins. And in the case of the Los Angeles Chargers, you start Keenan Allen. And with Mike Williams, I think it really does come down to your roster construction. Mike Williams has transitioned over to being a little bit more of that boom bust wide receiver. He is the wide receiver 20 so far this season on a points per game basis. And now if you look at what we have had since the bye week with Mike Williams, It's been very disappointing. 4 points, 7, 7, 27. Now, if you look at that 20-point performance that he had, it's a little deceiving because he had that one, I believe it was a 50-yard receiving touchdown at the very end of the game against the Steelers. If you were to remove that one catch from Mike Williams, then you'd be looking at a stat line being 4 points, 7 points, 7 points, 7 points, 8 points. And going back to week 6 against the Ravens, 4.7 fantasy points. Going back to week 4 against the Raiders, 2.1 fantasy points. So if you were to remove that one catch from Mike Williams, and I know it's not fair to do that, but let's just say it happened. Like, you could see the all-time floor for Mike Williams of him only getting the double-digit fantasy points 1 week since week 3. Now, that's not the case. Yes, he gets that long ball receiving touchdown, but that's kind of the range that I think you're looking at Mike Williams with now. I think you're looking at him as, does he get that long ball receiving touchdown? If not, he's going to be pretty disappointing. It's nice to see that the volume is trending up for Mike Williams in this offense. 5, 5, 5, 6, 6, 8 targets. That's a straight linear line up. Against the Bengals, this is a defense that's better against the run than they are the pass, and I'd imagine this gets into a slight shootout. If you're looking at the implied team total with what Vegas is currently telling us to expect in this game, they currently have the Chargers as a middle-of-the-road offense. I mean, projected to score the same amount of points as Washington at 23.75. I think with Mike Williams, it really comes down to your roster. He's a high ceiling player, but definitely a low floor. So I think that he's going to be a borderline wide receiver, low end wide receiver 2, most likely a high end wide receiver 3. Now, our next game, the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions, nothing to speak of. You start Adam Thielen, you start Justin Jefferson, and you don't start any wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. One thing that you could consider is going through and playing TJ Hawkinson. I mean, I'm interested to know how this offense functions if they do not have DeAndre Swift. Like, how the hell are they going to move the ball down the field? I would imagine it would have to be through Hawkinson. This past week, it was definitely really ugly. We only had 3 targets in this offense, but he did walk away with the receiving touchdown. So, I mean, that gave him a fine day from a fantasy football perspective. With Hawkinson, he's going to be a volatile option. I mean, the offense is going to be the worst offense in the NFL. It really just does come down to, do you think that Hawkinson gets the receiving touchdown? If so, you can play him. If not, I would avoid. Now, our next game, the New York Giants and the Miami Dolphins. With the Giants right now, you don't even know who the quarterback's going to be. We don't know what wide receivers are going to be healthy. Sterling Shepard yesterday got in a limited practice. I mean, I believe you didn't even have Kadarius Toney practicing at all. I don't think you can start anybody for the Giants. I think the only player starting for the Giants is Saquon Barkley, hoping he catches 6 or 7 balls out of the backfield. Now, in the case of Miami, you're going to have to lower your expectations slightly with Jalen Waddle when you're getting Devontae Parker back in. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what does that actually mean in reference to Jalen Waddle? You're lowering him in your expectations from being the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy that he was last week to now being a high-end mid wide receiver 2. You're playing Jalen Waddle no matter what. I would be willing to avoid Devontae Parker here because I think the opportunity for this game to turn into a shootout is not going to be there. And with Devontae Parker, I'd rather just see him 1 week healthy before we decide to go through and put him in our starting lineup. I would play Waddle and Mike Gesicki against the Giants. Now, our next game, the Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Jets. Right now for Philadelphia, I think that this is actually going to be a bounce back game for this offense. Right now, they are favored by 7 points in this game, and Vegas is projecting them to score 25.75 points. That's actually more than the Ravens. That's more than the 49ers. That's more than the Chargers. That's more than the Bills this week, and it's because the great matchup that they have against the New York Jets. Now, of course, they're going to be scoring the ball a lot by running it. I mean, this is an offense, especially in this matchup in particular, you'd imagine that they try to just funnel the majority of the production that they're going to have through the ground here. Now, with that being said, I still think that it's going to be an interesting spot to possibly go through and play Dallas Goedert, play Devonta Smith. I mean, Goddard in particular was the tight end that I went all in on this past week. I thought that Dallas Goedert was an elite level tight end option. Now the offense completely cratered. I think I may be going right back to the well, because if you're still looking at the opportunity that Dallas Goedert has had in this Philadelphia Eagles offense since Zach Ertz was traded, he is still operating as the dominant alpha tight end. I mean, he's getting every single snap. He's getting a high percentage of the team's targets, averaging over 25% of this team's target share over that time period. Now, Smith is a little more interesting because with Dallas Goedert, we can say play him because there are really no other options at the tight end position. With Smith, you should have some other wide receivers. I think he will be a very volatile wide receiver, very similar to Mike Williams. I think you consider him as a low-end wide receiver too. Now, our next game, we have the Indianapolis Colts and the Houston Texans. With Houston, I don't even want to play Brandon Cooks anymore. Brandon Cooks went from seeing 10, 11 targets in a game to now he's down to about 5. I don't even want to play Brandon Cooks. I think the only player you're playing in this game out of the receiver core will be Michael Pittman. I know with Michael Pittman, he had a bunch of different drops against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this past week. Drops are not predicted going forward. Please don't overreact. I know the average fantasy football player, they're very bad at looking at a drop on the field and just going, okay, I can see that. I know that's a bad thing. So they'll see Michael Pittman drop a pass and go, okay, I need to lower down Michael Pittman. No, that's not what you're doing at all. Michael Pittman generated separation. He was able to draw that target. Now, yes, the end result of that was not good. And next time, hopefully he catches the ball. But I mean, every single time that you see another wide receiver on the field, every single time that you see T.Y. Hilton there, just as an example in that same offense, not being able to generate that separation, not being able to draw that target at all, that's about the same thing as a drop pass. And that happens way more throughout I honestly think that drop passes are something, especially if you look at wide receivers that, have a bunch of different drop passes and then look at that the following season. It's not even correlated, really. Deontay Johnson dropping a bunch of balls last year. He's not dropping anything this year. It's a small sample, randomness type thing that's vivid in your mind because you see it on the television screen, but in reality, it doesn't have that much predictive weight going forward. Ignore the drops from Michael Pittman. Just go through and start him in fantasy. Now, our next game, Washington and Las Vegas. I am expecting that Curtis Samuel and Logan Thomas both increase their role. Their second week back from their respective injuries. I would not want to go through and play them right away. I would rather wait until we see a productive game from either Logan Thomas or Curtis Samuel to play them. With Terry McLaurin, y'all know I've never been a massive McLaurin fan. You're going to have to go through and play McLaurin. He still has that same exact role in this offense, even though I thought that he was a horrible pick in the third round. That was so long ago. Now I think that pretty much everybody has changed their mind with Terry McLaurin here. And then with the Las Vegas Raiders, fire the hell up both Foster Moreau and Hunter Renfrow, especially Hunter Renfrow. When you take out Darren Waller, when you take out Henry Ruggs in this offense, who the hell are they going to throw the ball to? Brian Edwards, literally the perfect example of something that we were talking about, like Michael Pittman. Yeah, you want to hate on Michael Pittman for dropping balls, but Brian Edwards, who plays every single snap and isn't good enough to draw a single target, that's the wide receiver that you need to be avoiding. That's the buns wide receiver that you want nothing to do with. I would be surprised if Brian Edwards can come out and get 6 targets in this game. You're only starting Hunter Renfrow. You're only starting Foster Moreau. And now our next game, the Rams and the Jags. The Rams right now are favored by 12.5 points in this game. What's very interesting is Vegas is projecting the Jacksonville Jaguars to have the lowest scoring offense this week, behind the Houston Texans, behind the Chicago Bears, behind the Denver Broncos, and behind the Jets. Right now, they're projecting the Jacksonville Jaguars to be horrendous. Dan Arnold on the IR, you can't start a single player for the Jacksonville Jaguars unless it's James Robinson, and if James Robinson plays, we don't even know if he's going to play right now. Now, in the case of the Los Angeles Rams, they're projecting the Rams to have the second highest scoring offense this week, only behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, you're starting Kupp. Don't need me to tell you that. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be going through and naturally just jamming in Odell Beckham Jr. I'm going to have a really hard time doing so. I know Odell looked fantastic I don't even want to say he looked fantastic this past week. He drops about 20 fantasy points this past week. Okay, let's get that out there. Odell, yes, he has a decent day from fantasy. But still, it was a very ugly game. It was a very ugly way that he got there. He drops 19 points. The wide receiver that I still want to stand by, I believe he's going to be the wide receiver 2 this season, will be Van Jefferson. Van Jefferson, he himself drops 18 points against the Packers. He has 9 targets. You're looking at the volume for Van Jefferson. It's been way more consistent so far this season. Van Jefferson has had 62 targets this year. I don't even want to look at what Odell Beckham Jr. has had on the total for this season because in Cleveland, a lot of those were empty targets. Over the past 2 games with the Los Angeles Rams, he's had a total of 13 targets, averaging about 6.5 targets a game. Yes, he'll be able to increase his role. I would want to see it one more week from Odell Beckham Jr. before I decide to play him. I would actually be playing Van Jefferson over Odell, even though they are pretty close here. And now our next team is going to be the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. You play Deontay Johnson, you play Hollywood Brown, Rashad Bateman, and Chase Claypool are both marginal flex plays at best that have some upside, but very low floors. Freiermuth is going to be the interesting conversation. And obviously you play Mark Andrews. I don't need to talk about any of those players. Freiermuth is, I think, the guy that a lot of people are going to be interested about. And with Pat Freiermuth, we actually got a question in the live stream last night saying, are we playing Freiermuth or Kyle Pitts? And can you imagine can you imagine? Because y'all know I was the leader of the Kyle Pitts is overrated train coming into the season. Can you imagine if I would have said that Pat Freiermuth would have been about in that same conversation back then? Y'all would have deplatformed me off YouTube. I would have been permanently removed from the platform. But now you're living in a world where Pat Freiermuth, I mean, since the bye week, since week 7, in a 5-game span, he scored 5 touchdowns. He's averaging a touchdown a game. He's doing so with volume as well. I will say I'm going to be a little hesitant going forward because since you've had Chase Claypool coming back into this Pittsburgh Steelers offense, you've had the targets for Freiermuth going from 7, 6, and 9 to 7 and 4. So you are seeing that trend in the wrong direction. You're seeing his role shrink it just a little bit. And this matchup against the Ravens isn't one that I think the Steelers are going to be able to effectively move the ball down the field. I mean, right now the Steelers are only 4-point underdogs, which I'm a little bit surprised to see. I'm assuming it's because, I mean, they're at home and at the same time, it's an in-division game. I mean, if you're looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, Vegas is projecting them to be the only outscoring the Jets, Broncos, Bears, Texans, and Jags. I think you play Deontay Johnson, no question. I would be a little more hesitant than most to play Pat Freiermuth, though. And then with the 49ers and the Seahawks, you play Brandon Ayuk, you play George Kittle with no Deebo Samuel. That's an easy call. I mean, with Brandon Ayuk, yes, I was hesitant this past week, but that was because, I mean, if you looked at the totem pole of targets in that offense, and with the fact that that's going to be a run-first team with Elijah Mitchell, I wasn't really excited about Ayuk. It's a completely different scenario now. Good matchup against the Seattle Seahawks, and at the same time, no Deebo Samuel. Ayuk's going to see a larger role. Now, in the case of the Seattle Seahawks, I know people hate me for it because coming out of the bye, when DK Metcalf put up that very disappointing performance with Russell Wilson their first week back, we came through and we said, you know what? Let's buy the dip. Let's buy the dip. Let's go get DK Metcalf. Let's go get Tyler Lockett. Let's go get Russell Wilson. And since then, this offense has been atrocious. Horrible to say the least. With Metcalf, 5, 7, and 2 fantasy points. And with that last game against Washington, everybody saw it. Everybody saw the Washington football team and the Seattle Seahawks go at it, where DK Metcalf had 1 reception, 13 receiving yards. That's laughable. There's no excuses for that. And it's a tough matchup as well this week against the 49ers. Now, we had to drastically move DK Metcalf down our rest of season rankings. We had to drastically move him down our rankings this week as well. I moved him to the same tier as Hunter Renfrow, Brandon Ayuk, and Brandon Cooks. I think you have to play Metcalf. I think you have to. I would prefer Lockett over Metcalf. But still, at the end of the day, you're imagining that this Seattle Seahawks team is going to be trailing the majority of the time here, even with them at home. And I think if they're throwing the ball, it's going to be so concentrated between just those 2 wide receivers, you almost have to play them. Now, our next game, the Denver Broncos and the Kansas City Chiefs. With Denver, this is looking like it's going to be a horrible offense this week. Right now, Vegas has them projected to lose this game by 9.5 points, and they have them as the 4th lowest scoring offense this week, only ahead of the Bears, Texans, and Jags. I don't think you can start a single player for the Denver Broncos. My preference would be Jerry Jeudy, but with how this offense is going to be divided up, and at the same time, with how this offense is not going to have a lot of production to go around in general, I can't start anybody. I think the only player that you're going to be starting in this game from the receiver and tight end core will be the usuals, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. That's it. Let's move on. Now, the New England Patriots, Buffalo Bills, as the last game here, is going to be an interesting conversation point because I know a lot of people were screaming at me for ranking Josh Allen down as our quarterback 5 in our video yesterday. What do you want? He's going up against the New England Patriots defense. This is a brutal matchup. If you don't believe me, go bet this game. Right now, Las Vegas, as we've already said, knows more than us. And they have the Buffalo Bills as the 15th best offense this week. Usually, this offense is sitting at 1. Right now, this is supposed to be a close game. The Bills are only favored by 3 points at home. I think that you play Stephon Diggs, obviously. You play Dawson Knox, but expect some Dawson Knox regression because the exact opposite of Rob Gronkowski that we started talking about the video with, Dawson Knox is going to see some serious touchdown regression going forward. If you go through, you look at his points per game, yeah, Dawson Knox has been a fantastic option. He's been around the tight end 5, but still, you're looking at the targets and the touchdowns. He's had 41 targets, 7 touchdowns. That's not going to be sustainable. Now, yes, that's in the context of a very good offense. And in the Buffalo Bills offense, you would expect most players to have a higher touchdown rate than average. But still, Dawson Knox, this is very similar to what you had with someone like Robert Tonyan last year. Y'all know we were screaming to avoid Robert Tonyan because, that touchdown rate could not maintain. Very similar with Dawson Knox. Now, on the New England Patriots side of things, I don't think we start anyone. I just think it's going to be a really tough matchup against the Buffalo Bills. I think that it's going to be really hard to pin down exactly which player is going to come through with production, whether that's Hunter Henry, whether that's Kendrick Bourne. I mean, if you were playing a best ball league, or if you say you're going through and submitting a DFS tournament lineup, then sure, we can have a conversation, because I think there's probably going to be 1 or 2 players from this game that do pop off. The issue is predicting who that's going to be. And I think that's going to be a very tall task for anybody who tries to do so. Now, of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. If you have not done so already, go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel to win a Fantasy Flock Network hat. Go check out some of those player props on Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK so you can get that first deposit match dollar for dollar up to $100. Of course, you can find that link in the comment section, find it in the description of the video. And thank you again. I hope you have a great day, and I hope I see you out with the video tomorrow.